Maya stood in the airport terminal with her duffel bag hanging heavy on her shoulder. Her uniform was gone, traded for plain clothes, but the weight of service remained stitched into her bones. She watched families reunite with bright smiles and loud laughter, yet she felt like a ghost moving between the living. She was greeted by her mother, who hugged her tight and told her how proud everyone was at home. Maya smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes because her mind was still across the ocean, where sandstorms roared and nights never slept. The car ride home felt unreal. Streets were clean and peaceful, no alarms, no orders, no roaring engines, yet her hands remained tense on her knees. Her mother spoke about neighbors and cousins and parties planned in her honor, but Maya heard only pieces of the sentences because her brain kept scanning for threats. She noticed rooftops, alleyways, and passing cars, as if danger waited behind each corner. When they reached home, everyone called her a hero. There were banners on the porch and cell phones capturing videos. People asked questions about battles and bravery, stories and medals. Maya answered politely, but each question hit her like a small hammer, reminding her of things she worked hard to forget. The night ended and the guests left, but Maya did not sleep. The room was silent, yet she could hear distant echoes of artillery in her head. Her heart raced for hours before exhaustion forced her into broken dreams. Days passed slowly. She tried to live normally, but normal felt like a foreign country. She walked to the grocery store and her body jumped at the sharp beep of scanners. She sat in a cafe and could not sit with her back to the door. Every sound felt too loud. Every stranger looked suspicious. The war had followed her home, even if no one else could see it. Maya woke before sunrise, drenched in sweat and breathing fast. The dream had been violent and sharp, filled with flashing lights and roaring engines, and the familiar metallic scent that clung to the air during deployment. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to push the images away, but they refused to leave. She wondered if anyone else remembered their nightmares in high definition, or if this curse belonged only to veterans who carried memories like shrapnel under their skin. She moved through the house quietly because her mother was still sleeping. Maya brewed tea and watched steam rise from the cup, but the calm moment did not settle her nerves. She scanned the windows and listened for sounds that did not belong. Her mother walked into the kitchen, asking if Maya was excited for the welcome event at the community center. Maya nodded, because nodding was easier than explaining how loud places made her chest feel tight and her heartbeat feel like a drum under attack. By afternoon, they were in the community center, where neighbors smiled and clapped and hugged Maya. She tried to smile, but the fluorescent lights buzzed and children screamed and chairs scraped against the floor, creating sharp bursts of sound that made her flinch. Each noise shot through her like a burst of electricity. She kept scanning exits, counting heads, and tracking movements like she had been trained to do in dangerous zones. She told herself that this was safe, that no one here was carrying weapons, that no one here wanted to kill her. Yet her body refused to listen. After an hour, her breathing was uneven and her vision narrowed. The walls felt closer, and voices blurred together into a single, overwhelming roar. Her mother noticed her stiff posture and pale skin and asked if she needed air. Maya pushed outside and leaned against the building, pulling deep breaths of cool wind into her lungs. She closed her eyes, but instead of calm, she saw headlights cutting through smoke and heard distant explosions. Her hands shook so badly she had to sit down on the curb. A young boy approached and asked if she was okay. She forced a smile and said she was fine, but inside she was unraveling thread by thread. The boy ran back to his parents and Maya felt relief wash over her. She needed space. She needed silence. So she told her mother she was walking home and refused the offer of a ride because cars made her feel trapped. The walk was long, and the sky shifted from blue to orange. The distant rumble of traffic reminded her of convoys moving through desert roads. She kept glancing behind her, expecting danger. Her heart pounded, not from effort, but from memory, embedded like scars. She hated this feeling, hated that the war was over, yet still marching through her bloodstream. That night, the second trigger hit. Dinner was almost peaceful until fireworks burst in the distance. In a split second, her brain flipped from home to battlefield. The crack and sizzle of fireworks became rifle bursts and grenades. Her muscles locked and her breath vanished. She dropped to the floor and curled her arms over her head, waiting for orders, waiting for cover, waiting for something that never came. Because this was not a war zone. This was a backyard celebration of a birthday. Her mother rushed to her, confused and frightened, asking what was wrong. Maya could not speak. She stared at the wall, trembling until the fireworks faded and the room was quiet again. Her mother held her and whispered that everything was okay. But nothing felt okay. Maya wanted to explain, but words would not form, and shame clamped down on her throat. She excused herself and sat alone in her bedroom, trying to steady her shaking hands. In the darkness, she whispered questions to no one. Why is this happening? Why can I not control it? Why do loud sounds tear into my mind? Why do I see things that are no longer real? The silence did not answer. Instead, it pressed against her ears, heavy and thick. Over the next days, triggers multiplied. A car backfired and she ducked behind a wall. A neighbor slammed a door and she stiffened, ready to dive for cover. She walked into a grocery store and the crowd felt like a chaotic marketplace in hostile territory, watching, waiting. She rushed out before she could finish shopping. Her mother tried to help, offering company or conversation, but Maya withdrew deeper because she could not explain a battlefield that no one else could see. Sleep was worse. Nightmares unfolded like movies. Her squad running through dust, bold orders shouted over ringing explosions, people falling and bleeding and vanishing in the smoke. She woke gasping each time, scrambling for orientation. Furniture was furniture, not sandbag walls. Her mother was her mother, not a medic. Her bedroom was safe, but her brain refused to accept that truth. One evening, Maya sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. She felt hollow, as if the war had carved out pieces of her identity until only fragments remained. A neighbor approached, trying to chat about travel and jobs and future plans. Maya nodded along, but inside she replayed memories of casualty reports, supply missions, and funerals. Words like future and job felt foreign compared to survival and duty. The neighbor waved goodbye, and Maya stared into the fading light, wondering if anyone would ever understand how exhausting it was just to exist in a peaceful world. Peace demanded softness and trust, but war had taught her hardness and suspicion. She was stuck between two realities, unable to belong fully to either. Inside, her mother asked if she wanted to talk, but Maya simply said she was tired and went to bed. Early morning sirens from distant streets woke her, and she bolted upright, heart racing, shaking. She sat hunched, hugging her knees, whispering to herself that she was safe, that she was home, that no one was coming for her. Yet each whisper felt like a lie her body refused to believe. Her mind was a battlefield, and she was still fighting, even though the war was long over. Maya stopped going out unless necessary, because the world felt too sharp, too loud, and too unpredictable. The sidewalks were filled with people who moved casually, without scanning their surroundings, without checking corners or measuring distance to exits. Maya could not walk like that. Even when she tried to blend in, her eyes darted everywhere, searching for threats, the way she had been trained to do in hostile environments where one mistake cost lives. At home, her mother encouraged her to join family dinners, to meet relatives, to step back into normal life. But Maya felt disconnected. Everyone talked about work, school, weddings, parties, and small concerns that civilians carried like smooth stones. Maya carried different stones, heavier ones, unseen but never forgotten. She listened to conversations and felt like a stranger in her own home, watching a world she no longer belonged to. One afternoon, her cousin visited after many years and greeted Maya cheerfully. He spoke about college and opportunities and how proud he was of her service. He asked playful questions about life in the military, expecting heroic stories and thrilling adventures. Maya sat silent. Her throat tightened because every memory he asked about was stained with pain or fear or loss. She finally forced a small smile and said that it was complicated. He laughed lightly and said she was being mysterious, thinking she was joking, but inside she was trying not to drown. When evening came, the house was quiet. Her mother washed dishes and hummed softly, while Maya sat in the living room staring at a small box that held her old dog tags and a photo of her squad. She traced her fingers over the edges of the picture, seeing faces and remembering names, voices and endings. She whispered the names under her breath, one by one, honoring them because she feared that if she stopped saying their names, the world would forget them completely. She remembered the day the photo was taken. Everyone smiling, dusty and tired, joking about the heat and dreaming of home. Now, some of them were buried, and others lost to their own demons. Later that night, Maya attempted to sleep, but her mind twisted memories into nightmares. She saw explosions and smoke and felt the heat against her skin. She heard orders shouted through radio static and the ringing that followed artillery blasts. She woke suddenly, heart hammering and breath shallow. The room was dark, safe, and still, yet her body reacted as if she had just sprinted for cover. The sheets tangled around her legs like sandbags, and she could not breathe. She crawled to the window and opened it, letting cold air hit her face until the panic began to ease. The following day, she tried to distract herself by reading, but the words blurred and her thoughts drifted back to deployment. She tried music, but every sudden beat made her flinch. She tried television, but war scenes triggered flashbacks and loud comedy shows grated on her nerves. Finally, she turned everything off and sat in silence, staring at the wall as hours slipped by. Her mother found her like that and asked gently if something was wrong. Maya shrugged and said she was fine, but her mother looked at her with worried eyes that saw through the lie. Over time, isolation wrapped around Maya like a heavy coat. She avoided friends from school because she felt changed, and they remained the same. She avoided crowds because they overwhelmed her. She avoided open questions about her service because they ripped open wounds that never truly healed. She spent long hours walking outside at strange times when the streets were empty because silence felt safer than people, and darkness felt familiar. One late evening, while walking through the quiet neighborhood, Maya passed by an abandoned playground. The swings creaked softly in the wind, and the empty slides reflected the moonlight. The place reminded her of the outposts she guarded with her squad, silent, abandoned, and heavy with ghosts. She sat on a bench and stared at the swings, feeling the weight of loneliness settle deeper into her chest. She whispered to herself, asking why she survived when others did not. She wondered if guilt was part of the uniform no one returned. The next morning, her mother tried to convince her to visit a neighbor gathering, but Maya refused, saying she was tired. Her mother insisted gently, saying that staying locked away would make things worse. Maya snapped suddenly, raising her voice, saying she was not locked, she was protecting everyone. Her mother froze, shocked by the outburst. Maya immediately regretted it, but could not apologize because her throat burned with shame. She retreated to her room and shut the door, wishing she could explain the constant tension in her muscles and the noise in her mind, but the words were tangled inside. Days blended into each other, marked by nightmares, sleeplessness, and silent meals. Her mother suggested counseling, but Maya dismissed it, saying she was fine because she had survived real war, so she should survive this too. She believed that asking for help meant weakness, and weakness was dangerous because in war, it got people killed.
She did not know how to unlearn that mindset. Eventually, a distant friend from her unit sent a message, checking in. Maya stared at the screen for a long time before replying. The friend wrote about sleepless nights, loud noises, sudden panic, and therapy sessions. Maya blinked reading those words because they described her life almost exactly. The friend said that healing was slow but possible, and that staying silent made it worse. Maya hesitated, holding the phone as if it weighed 100 pounds, before replying that she was struggling too. The friend responded with understanding, not pity, and told her she was not alone. For the first time in months, Maya felt a tiny spark of connection, but it flickered, quickly replaced by doubt. The next morning, she considered getting help, but fear held her back. What if therapy unlocked memories she wasn't ready for? What if talking made the nightmares stronger? What if people judged her, called her weak or broken? These questions curled around her mind like barbed wire, and she did nothing. Yet, even as she avoided help, the world outside continued to trigger her. A car backfired and she dropped to the ground. A neighbor argued loudly and she froze in place, shaking. A plane flew low overhead and she covered her ears, waiting for the sound to fade. Each incident pushed her deeper into herself until silence became both her shield and her cage. She no longer knew if she was safer inside or outside her house. All she knew was that the war was not finished, even if everyone else believed it was over.
Weeks passed, and the atmosphere inside the house grew heavy with unspoken tension. Maya rarely joined her mother for meals, and when she did, she barely touched her food. Their conversations were shallow and careful, as if both were afraid that one wrong sentence would cause the fragile peace to break. Maya felt guilty because she knew her mother only wanted to help, but she also felt trapped because explaining her pain felt impossible. Her wounds were invisible, yet they consumed every corner of her life. One afternoon, her mother knocked softly on her door and asked if they could talk. Maya hesitated before opening the door. Her mother held a pamphlet in her hand with bold letters that read, "Veterans Support Services." She spoke gently, saying that seeking help was not a sign of weakness and that many soldiers struggled after coming home. Maya listened, but her body tensed at the suggestion. She said she did not need therapy and that she could handle everything herself. Her voice was sharp and defensive. Her mother sighed and placed the pamphlet on the dresser before leaving quietly. Maya stared at the pamphlet for a long time, feeling anger and fear twist inside her. She did not want strangers digging into her memories, asking questions she did not want to answer. She did not want pity. She wanted her old self back, the one who laughed easily and slept peacefully and listened to fireworks without feeling like the world was falling apart. But she did not know how to get that person back, so she retreated again into silence. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. The sky cracked with lightning and thunder shook the walls. Maya woke instantly, heart racing. Her mind did not hear thunder. It heard mortars and artillery. Her room dissolved into smoke and fire. She threw herself off the bed, crawling to the corner with her arms over her head, whispering orders and commands, her body trembling uncontrollably. The storm continued for what felt like hours, and when it finally passed, Maya sat shaking in the corner, drenched in sweat, with tears streaking her face. She felt humiliated and exhausted, yet unable to move. The next morning, she found her mother crying quietly at the kitchen table, clutching a mug with both hands. Maya wanted to comfort her, but she did not know how. Her mother looked up with red eyes and whispered that she was scared, not because Maya was dangerous, but because Maya was suffering and refusing help. Maya stood frozen, then turned away because she could not bear the weight of her mother's worry. She went for a walk, despite the damp roads and gray skies, because the house felt too full of emotions. As she walked through the neighborhood, she noticed how calm everyone else looked. A man washed his car, a woman walked her dog, children chased each other near their yards. No one scanned rooftops. No one startled at noises. No one carried the same invisible weapons inside their minds. Maya sat on a park bench and watched ordinary life unfold, feeling like a ghost, drifting among the living. She wondered if she would ever feel normal again, or if peace was a luxury she had lost forever. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sergeant Cole, a soldier she served with. He wrote, asking how she was holding up, and mentioning that he had started attending a veteran support group. He said it helped him feel less alone and that other people there understood the nightmares and triggers and constant tension. Maya stared at the message, rereading it slowly. Her chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to ignore it and forget she ever saw it, but another part wanted desperately to speak with someone who spoke the same language of trauma and survival. She typed a short response, saying she was not doing well, and then stared at the screen until he replied. That evening, Maya sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on. One of the neighbors lit sparklers for their kids, tiny bursts of light fizzling in the air. Maya flinched at the first spark, but forced herself to breathe slowly. She knew the sound was small and harmless, but her brain fought against her logic. She sat stiff until the sparklers went out and the kids ran back inside, laughing. After they disappeared, Maya whispered to herself that she was home, that she was safe, that no one was firing weapons. Even so, the tension in her muscles refused to fade. Later that night, she tried to sleep, but the thunderstorm flashback returned. Her dreams replayed moments she wished she could erase. She saw a convoy ambushed, dusty air filled with shouting and gunfire. She saw a medic treating wounds with shaking hands. She saw a soldier she knew lying motionless. She woke gasping and stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. She stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. Her eyes looked haunted, her skin pale, her expression worn. She whispered that she could not keep living like this. The next day, she decided to leave the house and walk into town, hoping movement would quiet her thoughts. She passed shops and cafes and people chatting on sidewalks, but everything felt distant. She stopped in front of a bookstore and, without thinking, walked inside. The smell of paper and ink greeted her, and the quiet atmosphere offered a small slice of relief. She wandered between shelves until she found a section labeled Mental Health. She hesitated, then slowly reached for a book about trauma and recovery for soldiers. She held it in her hands, feeling the weight of the subject press into her palms. She bought the book without speaking more than a few words to the cashier, then hurried outside, clutching the bag like contraband. When she returned home, her mother asked where she had been. Maya simply said, "Downtown," and went to her room. She opened the book and read page after page descriptions of symptoms that echoed her own: hypervigilance, insomnia, nightmares, avoidance, panic attacks, guilt, isolation. The words felt like someone had followed her around and documented her daily battles. She felt understood by paper, even if she could not speak those truths aloud. Over the next several days, Maya read quietly in the corner of her room. The book explained how trauma rewired the brain, how survival mode became constant, how normal environments felt dangerous, how memories could break through without warning. It talked about therapy, medications, support groups, service dogs, grounding techniques, breathing exercises. She absorbed every sentence like someone starving for answers. And though fear still lingered, she began to think that maybe healing was not impossible. One evening, while reading, she paused at a paragraph describing survivor's guilt, how soldiers questioned why they lived while others died, how they carried names in their hearts like gravestones, how the weight never truly lifted, but became lighter with time. Maya closed the book and stared at the ceiling, whispering the names of her squad members again, honoring them because she feared forgetting them would be betrayal. When she finished, she wiped her eyes and breathed slowly for the first time that day. Still, she could not bring herself to ask for help. Not yet. She continued isolating from neighbors and relatives. She continued flinching at noises. She continued hiding her panic attacks behind closed doors.
But now she also carried a small spark of awareness that her suffering had a name, that other soldiers shared this burden, that she was not singularly broken. Her battles were real, and she was not weak for having them. However, sparks can fade without fuel, and as days passed, a new crisis approached, one that would push her to the edge and force her to confront the truth she kept running from. Her breaking point was drawing nearer, and she could feel it even if she did not yet understand it.
The next morning, Maya woke to a heavy silence, her body still trembling slightly from the panic attack she had suffered the previous night. She moved slowly through the house, feeling every muscle tight and rigid. Her mother left a note on the table, saying she was going to work and to take care of herself. Maya nodded, even though she knew no one could see her gestures. She brewed tea and sat by the window, staring outside at the quiet street. But her mind was far away, replaying memories she wished she could forget. That afternoon, her phone buzzed again. It was Sergeant Cole. He wrote that there was a meeting at the local veterans support group and that he thought she should come. He explained that the group was safe, that everyone there understood what it meant to return from war carrying invisible scars. Maya stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering over the screen. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to retreat deeper into isolation. But something in his words called to her, a small voice whispering, maybe this time she would not be alone. After hours of deliberation, Maya finally typed back saying she would come. She felt her stomach twist with anxiety and dread, but also a small thrill. She had not stepped into a room filled with strangers who understood her in months. The idea terrified her and comforted her all at once. She made a plan to leave the house after dinner and to walk slowly so that she could absorb control over her surroundings as best she could. When she arrived at the community center, her legs were heavy and her hands shook. She could hear voices inside laughing softly, talking quietly about their struggles. She paused at the door, listening for signs of danger, and then reminded herself that this was different. This was not a battlefield. This was a space for survivors. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, but the familiarity of military bearing and shared experiences immediately made her feel less alone. She spotted Sergeant Cole waving, and she walked toward him. The first few minutes were awkward. She could not speak freely because the memories were still raw, and the panic still lingered. But the environment was safe, and that knowledge offered relief. She listened to others as they shared stories of nightmares, hypervigilance, panic attacks, and guilt. She heard herself reflected in their words, and the weight in her chest lifted slightly because she realized she was not alone. A therapist named Marcus guided the session, speaking calmly and without judgment. He described PTSD as a natural reaction to abnormal circumstances. He emphasized that the body and mind had survived extreme conditions and that recovery was about learning to live with the memories rather than fight them endlessly. Maya nodded internally, absorbing every word as if it were a lifeline. She raised her hand and spoke softly about her own experiences. The room did not flinch at her words or label her weak. They listened and nodded in understanding. She described the nightmares, the triggers, the isolation, and the constant tension that left her exhausted. The words felt heavy leaving her mouth, but with each sentence, she felt lighter because they were met with empathy. After the session ended, Maya walked outside into the fading light. She felt exhausted and terrified, but also relieved. The weight inside her chest was not gone, but it was manageable for the first time in months. She realized that asking for help did not diminish her strength. It allowed her to hold it differently. She thought about her squad and how they would have wanted her to survive fully, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Over the next few weeks, Maya attended sessions regularly. Each time she shared more about her nightmares, her triggers, and her guilt. She learned grounding techniques, breathing exercises, and ways to cope when the world felt too loud. She learned that some memories would never leave, but that she could learn to face them without breaking. She made small connections with other veterans, sharing phone calls and messages in between meetings. She discovered that the shared understanding created a fragile network of trust that she could lean on when necessary. She also began to try therapy exercises at home, sitting quietly, focusing on her breath, acknowledging panic as it rose and passed without judgment, listening to recordings designed to calm the nervous system, using a weighted blanket at night to provide physical reassurance. When fireworks went off nearby, she practiced focusing on her breath and visualizing safety. She still flinched, and sometimes her heart raced, but the episodes passed faster and left less exhaustion in their wake. One evening, Sergeant Cole invited her to a small group activity outdoors. The session included mindful walking exercises and discussions about reintegration into civilian life. Maya walked slowly, observing the trees, the distant houses, the wind brushing her skin. She realized for the first time that the world outside her door was not inherently dangerous. It could be harsh, loud, and unpredictable, but it was not trying to kill her like it once had been. At home, her mother noticed subtle changes. Her posture was less tense. Her hands were no longer clenched constantly. Her eyes seemed brighter. She spoke more openly and allowed her mother to sit with her without recoiling. She still retreated at times, and her panic did not vanish completely, but she had begun to build small spaces of trust around herself. One afternoon, Maya visited the local animal shelter and encountered a therapy dog. She sat on the floor, letting the dog approach her, sniffing and resting its head gently on her lap. The contact offered a calm she had not felt in months. She began bringing the dog to therapy sessions and eventually allowed it to stay at her side during particularly difficult nights. Its presence provided reassurance, grounding, and a sense of safety. Maya began to understand that support came in many forms, and that relying on others was not betrayal of her strength, but affirmation of her humanity. By the end of the fifth part, Maya had begun to build a fragile but growing bridge between the battlefield and the quiet life at home. She understood that recovery was not linear, that setbacks would come, but she also knew she was no longer facing the struggle alone. She had tools, allies, and the understanding that her experiences did not define weakness, but reflected survival. She began to whisper the names of her fallen squad members with gratitude rather than guilt, acknowledging that she could honor them and still live fully. Maya still woke in the night at times, still flinched at sudden noises, and sometimes still felt the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. But for the first time in a long while, she also felt hope. That hope was small, tentative, flickering like a candle in a dark room, but it existed. She had started to reclaim herself from the shadows of war and understood that healing was a journey, not a destination. Maya began each morning with slow stretches and deep breaths. Her body was stiff and her muscles still tense from years of vigilance, but she noticed small differences. She could sit in the kitchen without scanning the windows constantly. She could drink her tea and smell it without flinching at every passing sound. Her mornings were not perfect, and sometimes the memories rose to the surface, but she learned to acknowledge them without allowing them to control her. She continued attending the Veteran Support Group and found that each meeting strengthened her resolve. The stories of others mirrored her own struggles and gave her perspective. She began to share more openly, recounting nightmares, hypervigilance, and isolation. She also listened and offered support to newcomers, realizing that even in her fragile state, she could provide strength to others. Her confidence grew slowly and quietly, like a seed sprouting under the soil. Outside the group, Maya began to challenge herself in small ways. She walked to the grocery store without planning escape routes. She sat in a cafe listening to music at a moderate volume. She allowed herself to watch movies without anticipating explosions and gunfire. She stumbled often, panic would flare, and she would retreat to safe spaces. But she noticed that recovery was measured in moments, not in perfection. She began to keep a journal, documenting triggers, reactions, and coping techniques, recording progress, small and significant alike. Therapy with Marcus deepened. Her sessions included discussion of trauma exposure, mindfulness practices, and cognitive exercises. She learned to identify early signs of anxiety and panic and how to intervene before they escalated. She learned grounding techniques like feeling her feet on the floor, naming objects in the room, and tracing textures with her fingers. She practiced controlled breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, and discovered that her body could respond differently if she consciously guided it. She also confronted painful memories piece by piece, acknowledging the fear, grief, and guilt without becoming paralyzed. The therapy dog became a constant presence. She named her Hope and spent hours sitting with her pet, stroking her fur and feeling the warmth against her body. The dog provided grounding, tactile feedback that helped her manage sudden panic attacks and hypervigilance. When a neighbor set off fireworks, Maya hugged Hope tightly and focused on the steady breathing of her companion instead of imagining artillery fire. Her mother noticed that these episodes were shorter, less severe, and that Maya recovered faster than before. Maya also began reconnecting with her family. She shared small moments with her mother, talking about mundane things, cooking together, or walking in the garden. She allowed herself to laugh when jokes landed. She still felt guarded at times, and conversations could trigger anxiety, but she started to see that love and connection were possible even after trauma. She called Sergeant Cole occasionally, sharing victories, small and setbacks, and found that the mutual understanding provided a sense of stability that reinforced her efforts. One evening, the support group organized a small outing to a nearby park. They walked in pairs and discussed strategies for coping in public spaces, for staying calm in crowds, and for managing intrusive memories. Maya walked aside another veteran, sharing stories and techniques. She described breathing exercises and grounding techniques that had worked for her. She also learned new strategies, including progressive muscle relaxation and visualization. She noticed that practicing with someone else increased her confidence. She felt a sense of belonging that she had not felt in months. As weeks passed, Maya tracked her progress and reflected on setbacks. She realized that healing was not linear and that each challenge was part of the journey. She recorded the nights she slept peacefully and the nights when nightmares returned. She documented her ability to enter social spaces without panic and the moments when triggers still provoked strong reactions. She noted improvements in her posture, in her interactions, in her energy, and began to measure progress in these small increments. Maya also reconnected with friends from her civilian life. She explained partially what she had gone through without going into graphic detail. They listened with patience and support. She realized that honesty about struggles fostered trust and that people who truly cared would accommodate her needs. She also set boundaries, establishing which interactions were safe and which would exacerbate anxiety. She felt empowered by these choices and learned that protection did not mean isolation, it meant awareness and agency. During therapy sessions, Maya revisited the battlefield memories, not to relive trauma, but to integrate them. She visualized safe environments and guided herself through triggers while practicing coping skills. She processed guilt about surviving and recognized that honoring fallen comrades did not require self-punishment. She began writing letters to friends who had died, expressing feelings left unsaid. She did not send the letters, but the act of writing released some of the heavy weight she carried. She felt a fragile relief and a sense of connection that was healing. By the end of the sixth part, Maya was still imperfect, still faced triggers and nightmares, but she had begun to reclaim life in ways she never imagined possible. She could leave the house without panic, she could attend social gatherings, she could sleep for stretches of hours, she could hold her mother and not flinch. She had tools, allies, hope by her side, and a support network built from shared experience.
Her world had expanded slowly, reclaiming spaces once occupied by fear and trauma. She understood now that recovery would continue indefinitely, that setbacks were not failure, that strength included vulnerability and asking for help. She whispered names of fallen comrades, not with guilt, but with respect and remembrance. She walked through quiet streets, breathing deliberately, noticing the wind on her skin, feeling safe within herself for the first time in months. She knew the journey would continue, but she also knew that she had begun to build a foundation strong enough to carry her through future storms. The battle within had shifted from survival alone to survival with strategy, support, and self-compassion. Maya could still startle at a sudden noise or flinch at unexpected movement, but the responses were no longer paralyzing. She had begun to trust that her body and mind could coexist with memories without letting them dominate her daily life. She began to envision a future where she could live fully, honor her past, and embrace healing as an ongoing process rather than a destination.
Maya woke early, with the sun filtering through her curtains. She stretched slowly, feeling the tension in her shoulders and legs lessen with each breath. The nights were still occasionally haunted by dreams, but their intensity had diminished. She had learned to face them now, not with terror, but with tools learned from therapy and the support of her group. She knew that healing was a process that would continue, but she felt a sense of ownership over her life that had been absent for months. After breakfast, she walked outside, carrying Hope, her therapy dog. The air was crisp and filled with birdsong. The neighborhood felt peaceful and welcoming rather than threatening. She moved carefully, noticing small details, the way she used to in the field, scanning for danger. But now each detail felt ordinary, safe, manageable. She allowed herself to slow her pace, to enjoy the feeling of wind on her skin and the sunlight on her face. At the support group that afternoon, she shared her journey with other veterans. She spoke openly about nightmares, triggers, and panic. She described how she learned grounding techniques, coping strategies, and how the presence of hope and friends had changed her ability to face the world. She also acknowledged setbacks, moments when fear still gripped her chest and anxiety rose unexpectedly. She emphasized that accepting vulnerability was a sign of strength, not weakness. The group listened and nodded in understanding. Many shared similar stories. Maya realized that what she thought were unique burdens were shared among those who had served. She felt a sense of solidarity she had not known since returning home. The meeting concluded with a mindfulness exercise, walking slowly outside, focusing on each step, on the sensation of the ground under her feet, and on the rhythm of her breath. She felt calm, grounded, present, alive. When she returned home, her mother greeted her with a warm smile and a quiet embrace. Maya hugged her back, allowing herself to feel the connection fully. She realized that she could share space without tension, without flinching, without fear of being overwhelmed. The house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a home, a place of refuge, a place where progress was possible. That evening, Maya sat in her room writing letters to the friends she had lost in service. She wrote about memories, shared missions completed, laughter, tears, fears, and respect. She did not intend to send them, but the act of writing released some of the burden she had carried for so long. She whispered their names aloud, acknowledging their presence in her heart and honoring their sacrifices without letting guilt consume her. Over the following days, Maya began to explore new activities. She returned to the bookstore, picking up novels and journals she had avoided. She walked to the park, observing children playing and smiling without the edge of tension she once felt. She joined a small volunteer program, helping fellow veterans navigate the transition back to civilian life. Sharing her knowledge and experience gave her purpose and reinforced the sense that she was no longer alone in her journey.
She still faced challenges. Sudden noises still triggered brief panic. Some memories returned vividly at unexpected moments. She applied coping strategies, breathing techniques, grounding, and verbal affirmation to guide herself through these moments. She reached out to friends in her support network when needed and relied on hope to provide comfort. She understood now that strength included asking for help and acknowledging limits. As weeks turned into months, Maya noticed gradual transformation. Her sleep became more consistent, her panic attacks shortened and became less intense. She attended family gatherings more comfortably. She spoke openly with her mother about fears, progress, and setbacks. She laughed more often and allowed herself moments of joy. She no longer saw herself as a broken soldier, but as a survivor, someone capable of growth, healing, and resilience. One afternoon, Maya walked through the city streets, confident and observant. She noticed life continuing around her, children playing, street vendors selling goods, laughter and conversation. She allowed herself to feel part of this ordinary world without fear. She carried her memories as a quiet companion, not as a chain. Her steps were measured, deliberate, calm, reflecting the balance she was cultivating between past trauma and present safety. That night, Maya reflected on her journey. Whispering names of fallen friends, she felt gratitude rather than sorrow. Tears came not from despair, but from recognition of survival and growth. She acknowledged the strength it took to face herself, to confront fear, to accept help, to rebuild connection. She understood that the battle with PTSD was ongoing, but now she faced it with knowledge, tools, allies, and a resilient heart. Maya looked at Hope resting quietly at her side and felt a sense of completion and continuity. She realized that healing did not mean forgetting, nor did it mean erasing the past. It meant living fully with awareness, compassion, and courage. It meant honoring memories while embracing the present and envisioning a future that was rich with possibility. The war had ended months ago, but the battle inside her mind had continued. She had once felt imprisoned by memories, by fear, by isolation, but now she had begun to reclaim life piece by piece, learning that survival included acknowledging vulnerability and nurturing resilience. Her journey was not finished, but she had crossed a threshold from merely existing to living fully. Maya lay down that night, eyes heavy yet calm. She whispered to herself that she was safe, that she had survived, that she would continue to heal, that the names of her fallen comrades would always be honored. She closed her eyes and for the first time in a long time felt not only the weight of survival, but the light of possibility. She drifted into sleep, guided by breath, by presence, by hope, by the knowledge that she could face tomorrow, whatever it held, because she was strong, and she was alive, and she was healing.